In this video, we're going to take a look at how to access the individual element of a list. And so in the pseudocode reference, you'll have a text and you'll have a list, and then you'll have brackets, and then you'll have the element, and then for a block, it'll just be the list name, and inside the block, there'll be the element. I think it's very worth mentioning at this point that in the pseudocode reference, the first element in any list is at an index 1 position. And if you return a number that's less than 1, if you try to index using a number that's less than 1 or greater than the length of the list, it'll give you an error instead of actually giving you what you're looking for. All right, so let's go see how this compares with Snap and Python. In the Snap programming language, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list of colors. So I've got this list called A list, red, green, blue, and yellow. And then I'm also going to create a variable called index. And I'm going to start out by setting that an index of 1. If you'll notice, there's little numbers out to the left of these elements inside the list. And these numbers represent the index or position of each color in that list. And notice that in Snap, you also start counting at 1. So the first element will be at index 1, and the last element will be at index whatever the length of the list is. In this case, the list is a length of 4, so the last element is at 4. So I have item index, so this is going to be the number 1 of a list, and this is going to be the list. So if I take item index of a list and click it, I get the color red, which is the first element in the list. So index was 1, and so that 1 represents the first element in this list. If I go in and change the element index to 3, and I change that here so that index is now 3, and then I try to access an item from a list at index 3, it's now going to give me the color blue because blue is at position 3 in that list. So in Snap, the way we access an element from a list is we use this item of command bar. And even though there's some stuff already in here, 1, last, random, you can also, this is one of the rare cases in Snap when you can drop a variable over that pull-down menu and just use numbers that you can control more instead of just having access to 1, last, and random. And then this is the spot where you drag your variable that's storing your list. All right, let's go ahead and see what the same notation looks like in Python. So in Python, the notation for getting a specific element out of a list is almost identical to that of the pseudocode. The big difference here is in Python, and in most programming languages actually, you'll start counting a list using the number 0. So 0 represents the first element, then 1, 2, and 3. So if I tried to access element 4, I would get an error because in this particular programming language, the length of the list is too big of a number to actually access an element out of the list. It's got to be 1 less than the length of the list. So if you're used to programming in Python, the notation is going to look identical, and so I'm going to very strongly caution you to watch and remember the fact that it starts counting at 1 and not 0. And if you're using Snap, then the count is the same, but it's a completely different schematic. You're going to have to kind of in your mind realize what that code is saying. But if I go ahead and run this cell, then you will see that I set up this particular list. And then if I access the 0 element out of that list, it's going to give me red. If I access the second element out of that list, it's going to give me the blue. And if I try to access the 4th element out of that list, or index 4 out of that list, which would be the 5th element, the 5th element doesn't exist, and so it'll give you an error and say that you have a list index out of range. All right, so that's how we relate both the Snap and the Python back to this pseudocode, and I hope you found this information helpful.